week away, but it's certainly pouring already outside today. Pouring away right here in Joburg. Not the summer weather we were looking forward to, that we were hoping to have nice warm weather today. It feels like winter's already come our way. But, ladies and gents, as Purim is a week away, I guess maybe it's to get me into the mode of Purim where I grew up in New York. In New York, Purim was rainy and cold and snowing. And yet, we always had a festive, jolly, beautiful Purim. So we've been talking about Purim the last few days, and we shared some beautiful insights. I think yesterday the idea was that it's in your hands. You can make a difference when the opportunity comes your way to try to help save society. When you have any way of helping the Jews of Ukraine, the people of Ukraine, it's your responsibility to do what you can, whether it's materially or spiritually. I don't know, but let's talk a little bit about Purim, a little quick recap, because it's our jolly festival that we're going to have next week on the 14th of Adar, or if you are in Jerusalem or any other walled city, it will be on the 15th as well. And of course, it commemorates the salvation of the Jewish people in ancient Persia, in what is today known as Iran. What happened then? Haman. It's funny what we Jews do. When somebody tries to destroy us, what do we say? We'll teach you a lesson. We'll turn you into a little biscuit that we'll eat with all types of fillings inside. You won't be forgotten. You'll be eradicated, and we'll remember who beat you, Haman. You're a little Hamantash today. This is what we do with all our festivals, right? Pharaoh tried to kill the Jews. Today we eat matzah, we have a whole festivity on Pesach to remember Pharaoh and his evil decrees. And think about Hanukkah. They tried to kill us. Well, we have donuts, we have latkes. Okay, so we Jews, we've known to turn every situation into the right way. Haman's decree was lahashmid, laharog, ulabed, to destroy, to kill, to annihilate all Jewish people, menar v'adzakim, from young and old, infants and women, everyone, biyom echad, one single day. That was the plan, as it is recorded in the Megillah that we've been reading, and in fact we'll continue with some other insights of the Megillah today. The Persian Empire of the 4th century, we're talking about 2,300 years ago that the Purim story happened. It extended, as the Megillah tells us, how many? Hamalech Mehodi Ad Kush, Sheva Ve'esrim Umeya Medina, 127 lands, and all the Jews were its subjects. And what happens? When King Ahasuerus had his wife, Queen Vashti, executed for failing to follow his orders at the advice of his advisor Haman, what happens? He arranged a beauty pageant to find a new queen, and a Jewish girl named Esther, Matza Chen Beinav, found favor in his eyes, and she became the new queen. And even though he wasn't aware yet, we're going to discuss this today, he wasn't aware of her Jewish identity, but we'll discuss exactly how he does become aware and the difference that makes. So meanwhile, the Jew-hating Haman was appointed prime minister of the empire. Mordechai, the leader of the Jews, and Esther's relative, some opinions say his cousin, some say his niece, it could be both. He defied the king's orders and refused to bow to Haman HaRasha. Haman was incensed, and he convinced the king to issue a decree ordering the extermination of all the Jews on the 14th of Adar. And it's very interesting why Haman chose the month of Adar, because he thought that this is a time that is a bad luck for the Jews. In fact, he cast a lot. That's what Purim means, casting lots. In Haman's mind, he was thinking, if I do this to the Jews, maybe I'm doomed, like his great-grandfather Amalek. He knows that Amalek didn't get away with it easily. So Haman thought of another plan. Said, if I leave it to chance, maybe then I'll be luckier. And it will work according to plan. And indeed, when he chose the month of Adar, he said, well, that's the time Moses died. Oh, so it's bad luck for the Jews. Without calculating that it's also the birth of Moshe Rabbeinu. In fact, tonight is Zayin Adar, the 7th of Adar, and tonight marks that. Somebody's mentioning that they can't get in, that they don't know if the class is on. So I'm just going to send a message out again, because for those of you watching elsewhere, we have something in Joburg right now called load shedding. Load shedding means we have no electricity. So whatever I'm teaching today is only based on my phone's internet. And if my phone dies, I have 19% battery left. So you better hope, as long as my phone battery lasts, that's how long our shir will last today. When my phone battery is depleted, I apologize, but the shir will have to end then. So I'm just going to send a message. I'm sorry. Despite load shedding, what should I write? Despite load shedding, it's all over Africa. I apologize. Okay, able to broadcast the shir on my phone. Feel free to join us. Okay. All right. So, with that in mind, we understand the Purim story and its message. There's a lot that goes on. Mordechai galvanizes all the Jews. He convinces them to repent, to fast, and pray to God. By the way, on that note as well, I think of a very interesting point, because in our parsha, we talk about the concept of teshuvah, right? The concept of offering sacrifices. Now, what does a sacrifice achieve? Atonement. What's interesting is the word atonement is also related to the word at one mint. Because when we betray God by transgressing the will of God, what happens to us at that moment? We become distant from Hashem. So, by offering a sacrifice, what's the Hebrew word for sacrifice? Karban. What's the etymology, the root of the word? Karov, to come close. You come closer with God, it's becoming one with Hashem. And that's the idea of a sacrifice, is the concept of teshuvah. When we do teshuvah, we become one again with Hashem. I think it's a very important point to consider, and that's what Mordechai does. Because the Jews have become somewhat distanced from God at the time. And in fact, we see that in the words of the Megillah, when Haman says to King Achashverosh, Yeshna echad mefuzar mefared ben ha'amim, there's one nation that is scattered amongst your people. He has a very good accusation against us. As much as we're trying to assimilate, we're different. He says these people are mefuzar mefarad. They're faribbled. They have problems. It's no secret that sometimes we Jews have a lack of harmony, of care, of love for each other, as we ought to have. So after their fasting, after their teshuvah, is when the salvation comes their way. And so Esther invites King Achashverosh to a feast. At the first feast, she's just getting him prepared and ready, foreplay. And eventually, she invites him to another feast with Haman as well. And she reveals to the king her identity, who she is. And we know what happens next. Previously, he killed his wife at the behest, at the advice of Haman. And now he kills Haman at the advice of his wife. So this is what happens. And Mordechai is appointed, Mordechai is appointed prime minister in his stead, and a decree was issued, granting the Jews the right that we could defend ourselves against our enemies. And so on the 13th of Adar, the Jews mobilized and killed many of their enemies. On the 14th of Adar, they rested and celebrated, but in the capital, Ubabiza, lo yishalchu et yadam. But we know that in the capital city, it took an extra day. So Shushan, which was a walled city, we commemorate it by all walled cities today. Now the question is if Joburg should be included in this arrangement, since we have all these walls here in Johannesburg, no? Oh, okay. But with all these walls, I sometimes think that maybe Joburg should be included in this arrangement. Anyways, we look at this story and we think about it. You know, the vast and powerful Persian Empire, whose defeat we celebrate on the holiday of Purim. And you think about this presentation. In fact, those who are following in their Megillas, I want to recommend that you go to, okay, if you're online, you could actually, I'm not going to post it, but you could just go into your Megillah, chapter 3, which we were reading yesterday, and verse 8 and 9. Okay, let's look at this. Vayomer Haman lemelech Achashverosh. Haman said to King Achashverosh these words, Yeshna am echad, there is this one people, this one nation, that is mefuzar umefarad ben ha'amim, that are scattered and separate amongst your people. You could say they're assimilated amongst your people. And v'daseim shanot mikol am, but their religion, their laws are different than all the other people of your nations. Ves dasei hamelech einam osim, and they do not follow the king's laws. V'lamelech ein shavel anicham, and therefore for the king, there's no use in keeping these people. Im alamelech tov, what does he say? If it pleases the king, then yikatev la'abdam, let it be written to annihilate, to destroy them. V'aseret alafim kikar kesef. And you know what, King Achashverosh? Money talks, and other stuff walk. And so he says to King Achashverosh, I will pay you to do away with these people. Big bucks. Aseret alafim kikar kesef. Haman was a rich man. He says, I will weigh out 10,000 silver talents to pay you. Al yedei oseh malacha, for those who will take care of this final solution. Okay, big bucks coming up here. That's what he says. Now, for those of you watching me online here, you could see a picture and you're wondering, what on earth am I demonstrating this picture? And I will tell you as we discuss this, what on earth. But first, let's just analyze Haman's words. Haman's argument is very straightforward and clear. He says something that we've heard many, many times. Jews are weird. Jews are different. They are alien. They are outsiders. They are parasites. They are an obstruction to normal society. They don't fit into the rest of the human family. They have their own faith. They have their own laws, which they feel superior to the king's laws. They are a nuisance, a threat, a growth in an otherwise harmonious and integrated society. They should be disposed of. That is the claim that Haman says. Have you ever heard of such talk before? They're different. I don't even know if we have to go as far back as Hitler, because even today people say such things.
I don't like Jews, but you're different.
Right. Yeah. So, and some of my best friends are Jewish while we're at it. Yeah. So it's very interesting. And so the Gemara discusses this. What does it mean that they are different? The Gemara says that they don't eat from our food, right? They have to keep kosher. They're different. And they don't marry our women, and they don't drink our wine. There's other examples the Gemara gives. They don't like to work. No, of course not. But they claim, well, employees tell their bosses, I have to keep Shabbos, I have to keep Pesach, I have to keep Sukkot, Rosh Hashanah. Sadly, I could tell you how many Jews I know today who, for one reason or another, they have to go to work on Shabbos. And it's sad to see that today, because in today's day and age, nobody should be forced to have to work on a Shabbos or Yom Tov. But many Jews do. Well, many Jews are intimidated. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, let me just move over this. The thing is, I don't want to be judgmental of people who do work on Shabbos, because I work on Shabbos. I'm a rabbi. I work harder on Shabbos probably than weekdays. I even work on Yom Kippur, exactly. But I want to show those who are present here this little clip. I want you to see, it's a cup of wine with a fly in it. And the Gemara discusses and says that they insult the king. Oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you what the king said to Haman. The king said, don't embarrass me. Don't pay me 10,000 silver talents to destroy the Jews. I have enough money on my own. You can do with them what you want. I give my stamp of approval. Do as you wish. But anyways, you all know the Purim story, so I'm not going to waste your time with the Purim story itself. I want to analyze a few elements and aspects of it. And so the king says the Gemara discusses the story. And the Gemara says as follows, that when they were giving examples, or when Haman was giving examples to Achashverosh, why it's not worthwhile to keep these Jews, why they're a nuisance and a parasites and they're not worth keeping in your nation. He says to them, they eat, they drink, they disgrace the throne. And he describes as follows: even if a fly falls into the wine glass on one of them, casts away the fly and drinks the wine, which is halachically permissible. But if King Achashverosh, the king, touches the wine glass of one of them, then he throws out the whole glass of wine. What an insult to the king. Now I want to ask you, my dear friends, virtually and in person here, why is it that if a fly is in your wine, you can get rid of the fly and you could drink the wine? But if King Achashverosh were to drink the wine, if it's not mavushal wine, I should add, then we can't drink it.
I think he is Tameh. He is
Pardon?
Tameh. Is he not Tameh?
Okay, so it's called Yayin Nesach. And it's a discussion, it's a law, a Jewish law, that any wine that is used for idol worship, Jews are prohibited from drinking. In today's day and age, when we don't know what a wine was used for, therefore all non-Jewish wine goes into the category of Yayin Nesach, and only wine, and there's lots of strict rules about the wine that you can consume. There are many, many rules, regulations, laws about the consumption of wine. Now, to tell you the truth, Haman was not the only one who came up with stories against the Jews. Throughout history, we've had many accusations and allegations against the Jewish people. I want to read one to you here from Philostratus, who was a 3rd century, I don't even know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He resided in Athens and in Rome, and he summarized the pagan world's perception of the Jews in his time. He says the Jews have long been in revolt, not only against the Romans, but against humanity. And a race that has made its own life apart and irreconcilable, that cannot share with the rest of mankind in the pleasures of the table, nor join in the libations or prayers or sacrifices, are separated from ourselves by a greater gulf than divides us from Surah or Basra of the more distant Indies. Okay? So, again, you have the very same argument in one form or another thousands of times throughout history, describing us Jews as different, as alien. The great Roman historian Tacitus, who lived in the 1st century of the Common Era, he said, the Jews regard as profane all that we hold as sacred. On the other hand, they permit all that which we abhor. Toward every other people, they feel only hate and enmity. They sit apart at meals, and they sleep apart, and although as a race they are prone to lust, they abstain from intercourse with foreign women. Okay, and he mentions various examples. I'll highlight one to you. He says the Jews regarded a crime to kill any newborn infant. Now the Romans, and as the Greeks before them, they killed any mentally or physically handicapped infants. They considered infanticide as the norm. A child who's not born fully, as the perfect human specimen, to them was waste. In their minds, keeping such children alive was pointless, unrealistic. So back to the Purim story. The viceroy, Haman's arguments to persuade the king, right? He says, look at these Jews, they're different. And King Ahasuerus, he seemed convinced. And indeed, he signs his name, he gives a stamp of approval that the Jews, every Jewish man, woman, and child living under Persian dominance would be exterminated on the 13th of Adar. And yesterday's shiur, we discussed how Mordechai saw it as vitally urgent and critical that Esther get involved and intercede immediately. And we see the whole turn of events, how Queen Esther invites her husband and Haman, Ahasuerus and Haman, to this drinking feast. And as we recall, Esther, from all the thousands of young women who were brought from across the empire as potential candidates as queen, she's the one who found favor in Ahasuerus' eyes. As the Megillah describes, the king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she won more of his favor and grace than all other women. And he set the royal crown upon her head. Years later, at this wine feast that we describe here, it's in chapter 7 of the Megillah. The king pledges to Esther that he will fulfill every wish she has. What does he say, Ronnie, since you have the Megillah in front of you? Ad chatzi malchus v'seyos. Up to half the kingdom. You're my partner. Up to half the kingdom's yours. And she utilizes that opportunity to make her fateful pitch. What does she say? Vatan Esther Mako Vatomar. Esther Amalka says back to the king, what does she say? Imatza sichem einecha v'malach tov tinasan linafshi b'shelasi ve'ami b'vakashasi. If the king can only fulfill my will, my request, what's a request? Ki inim karnu ani ve'ami, because me and my people, We have been sold. Lashmid la'roig u'la'beid, to be slain, to be destroyed. Oh, and had we been sold for slaves and bondswomen? Hechrashti, I would have kept silent. Very interesting, our words. That's not the concern. But the concern here is we're meant to be destroyed, extinct, exterminated. So clearly Esther is attempting to approach the issue from two sides. A personal one and an economical one. First, she exposes her Jewish identity. Remember, she was hesitant. Yesterday we were discussing how she was somewhat, vacillating, somewhat reserved. And she had a reservation before she went. And now she's there. She says, it's my people who are condemned to death. Now Esther knows that this won't alone do the trick. So she continues to discuss dengi. You know what dengi is? It's the Russian word for geld. Rands, dollars, cents. Haman, we know, also used logic and cash to convince Achashverosh. Remember what Haman said to Achashverosh? These people are not worthwhile, and I'll give you money. Right? So he uses 2 points. Esther knows the mind of her husband, so she uses the same logic and cash. By selling the Jews as slaves, she says to Achashverosh, you would profit a lot more than exterminating them. The money that Haman offered him is minuscule if you're going to weigh the potential profit you would get if you kept these people as your slaves. Now Achashverosh, who had not known, obviously, that Esther was Jewish until this point, he's outraged at Haman. You want to kill my wife? So we know what happens next. Everything turns around, as we discussed before. The entire climate in the Persian Empire towards the Jews is all of a sudden radically transformed. And Mordechai takes over. He succeeds Haman's position. He replaces him as the king's advisor now. Now the thing is, as we analyze the story, I have a question for you, my dear friends. Haman did not argue the case for Jewish extermination just on the basis of the senseless, venomous passion that Haman presented. Right? He didn't just say, he presented to the king what considered like this sensible, persuasive reason to annihilate the Jews. He said to the king that these people are different, right? He didn't just say annihilate the Jews because I don't like them. He didn't just call us parasites, it seems like he does, but he uses some more convincing logic, rationale. Oh, so Haman says they're alien. They don't follow your law. They're a bizarre people. They're a separatist nation. They don't mix with the rest of your people. They're corrupt. You can't have a fifth column amongst your people. You want that? Who wants that? Now that's a very strong accusation and allegation against the Jews. And that's perhaps why Achashverosh was convinced and accepts Haman's slander against us. I don't want a fifth column. That's why Achashverosh accepts to exterminate all men, women, and children. Now, but we look at Esther trying to, when he's persuading the king out of it, she doesn't discuss any of this. She doesn't refute or dispute any of Haman's points. Does she? You have a Megillah in front of you. Tell me. So why did Achashverosh annul the decree if he believed Haman's vile accusations against us? Now you might argue that indeed Esther was charming, She was pretty, she was beautiful, and if that's the case, she's such a pretty woman, then maybe that's what convinced him to change his mind, change his heart. Would I want to do that to my beautiful wife? But again, she didn't convince him to only save herself. She convinced him not that all her people could defend themselves. Okay? So she refutes the economic offer made by Haman by demonstrating that Achashverosh would lose money because he could have the Jews as good slaves. But what about all the other arguments that Haman made to have a Judenrein society, as you may call it? So before we examine Esther's response, or should I say lack thereof, let's see how similar these accusations were addressed in the history of our people numerous times. And I want to go back, since there's many famous cases, I want to go back to the time that the drama, the intrigue of, there's a city in America called St. Louis, Missouri. St. Louis is named after a French king named St. Louis. They called him a saint because the French population thought of him as a holy, righteous, pious person. St. Louis. Let me tell you about this holy St. Louis, who also expelled the Jews from his country. That's how holy he was. And everything I tell you here, I'm sharing with you from a Farbrengen that the Rebbe discussed on Purim, Taf Shin Chaf Test, 1969. So I'm not going to give you all the Rebbe's words. I'll try to quote some of them to you. But I want to share this with you just to give you an idea of the perspective the Rebbe looked at this story and put it into modern lens. And the Rebbe referred back to a story that happened at that period, 1240 in France. At the time, there was an apostate Jew. Unfortunately, that was very common in that era, by the name of Nicholas Dunnin. Anyone heard of him? Nicholas Dunnin. He was a Jew who converted to Christianity, sadly, in the early 13th century, the early years of the 1200s. And as a result of that, the Jewish community excommunicated him, led by Rabbi Yechiel of Paris. He made a public declaration that this person is excommunicated from the entire community. Now, such bans are not done so easily, but it can even be done today. Most recently, it's been done with a few people who refuse to give their wives a get. Anyone know what it's called in Hebrew? Cherem, that's right. If a person does not listen to the Beis Din's ruling, does not accept it, then the Beis Din can put them in cherem. We had a situation a year and a half ago, just before COVID, where a fellow from Israel, actually quite a wealthy guy, who refused to give his wife her get, he came to South Africa. The Beis Din said he's in cherem until he gives his wife a get. Excommunicated. He walked into our shul, and it was a very unpleasant situation. He misrepresented himself, because he called me up on Friday afternoon, sounding like a visitor from overseas, and yes, he was, and he needs a place to eat and a meal. He came dressed in his Hasidic garb to the shul. I welcomed him. And then I looked at his picture. I looked at his face, and I remember the picture. We get a memo from the Beis Din before Shabbos that said, if this guy rocks up at your shul, do not welcome him. He is excommunicated. He's an Orthodox religious Jew. But he's excommunicated until he gives his wife a get. It's probably the only tool that our Beis Din, or any Beis Din in the world today, could use to try to apply pressure to somebody to do something. And by the way, when it comes to divorces, it's interesting, the Talmud says, to free a woman, because don't forget Jewish law with all its complexity, a man halachically is allowed to have more than one wife. It's only since the Cherem de Rabbeinu Gershon, he must have known about credit cards, And he banned it 1,000 years ago. But only for Ashkenaz Jewry. Sephardic Jewry can still marry more than one wife. Now, last Sunday, I officiated the marriage of a Sephardic man to an Ashkenaz woman. Now, the truth is, I've officiated such weddings before as well, but I didn't know that there's a different ketubah. It doesn't invalidate the previous ketubahs. I always used an Ashkenaz ketubah. I wasn't aware that there's actually a separate Sephardic ketubah. In fact, I brought this issue up to the Beth Din. I said to them, you approved these marriages before. You never told me to use a different ketubah. So the Beth Din said to me, listen, it's not going to invalidate the other marriages, but when a Sephardic person gets married, there's a different ketubah. And what's interesting is, because he married an Ashkenaz woman, he had to make another commitment as well. That he's not, although he is allowed to marry other women, because the Cherem der Rabbeinu Gershon does not apply to Sephardic men, but because he's marrying an Ashkenaz woman, he accepts it upon himself as well, that he won't take on any other wives. No polygamy for him. Sorry. So it's a verbal, it's a part of his ketubah commitments that he had to make, a pact. Anyways, not to digress, the idea is that there is this idea called cherem, it's an excommunication. And Rabbi Yechiel of Paris used this excommunication for this man. Now, if we could apply it to a religiously observant Jew who is, for whatever reason, messing around and not giving it to his wife, because he thinks he wants to remain married to her, but she does not want to remain married to him, if we could apply it to him, how much more so to an apostate Jew who causes a lot of trouble? Because unfortunately, the Jews who converted to Christianity oftentimes caused a lot of trouble to the Jewish community. The cherem was for 10 years. It was a 10-year excommunication. If he will come back to Judaism, if he will stop his instigations against the Jewish community, then they will lift the cherem. But as oftentimes happens with people, let's look at Putin right now. Putin is only becoming hardened, right? He's becoming defiant. Well, this fellow, Nicholas Dunnan, also became very defiant. And he chose, instead of coming back to the Jewish community, and instead of stopping his instigations, he made it worse. And he decided to retaliate, to exact retribution on the community of France. And he stirred up, remember that was a period of the Crusades. He instigated the Crusaders who were on their way to liberate the Holy Land. He convinced them to perpetrate massacres in Europe of French Jewry, in Brittany, and I don't know the names of all the other places, but he caused terrible, terrible chaos for his own former brethren. And thousands of Jews were massacred, were killed by the Crusades. The only alternative they had was to baptize. Sadly, in our history, many, many times, worse than external anti-Semitism was internal, when it was our own people. You go back to the story of Moshe in Egypt. We mentioned Dasan and Aviram yesterday in the Shir. They were bigger troublemakers and instigators for Moshe than the Egyptians. Because when it's an external threat, it's very easy to identify. It's at least you know, you're aware. When it's internal, it's the worst. That's why family faribbles, you notice, are so self-destructive. And we are a family as a Jewish people. When one of us causes the trouble, boy, is it terrible. But the reason I want to mention this to you is, in 12, I don't know what year, sometime in that period, Nicholas Dunnan went to Rome, and he presented himself before the Pope Gregory of that time, Pope Gregory the Ninth, and he denounced the Talmud. He made presentations, manipulated in his own way, convincing the Pope how the Talmud is filled with Jewish supremacy. with all types of virulent attacks against that the Jews are that we mock Christianity. Now, I'm not going to say it was an entirely untrue. There are aspects. Don't forget, Yeshu was a Jew, but he also was a Jewish troublemaker. I mean, what the damage Jews experienced from his religion that he started throughout history is irreparable. It's untellable. It's unbelievable. But the Gemara does say some things about him, and he decided to exaggerate it even a lot more out of proportion. He used a lot of hyperbole and talked about how that the Talmud mocks the virginity of Mary and all types of things. And the Pope was persuaded that these accusations had merit, and he dispatched transcripts of all these charges to the church officials, along with an order to seize all copies of the Talmud and to burn them. There were numerous articles that were written at the time accusing the Jews of all types of allegations. And in March of 1240, Jews were compelled under pain of death to surrender all of their books of Talmud. Now imagine, there was no iCloud backup. There was no OneDrive. Today on your phone, you can get a whole terabyte on your phone of backup. Your phone crashes, In the past, I've experienced my phone crashing. I'm having a lot of trouble with my phone lately. That's why you got to be careful not to let your phone get water damage or anything. My phone was very good for the last 2-3 years. I got it in 2017, so 5 years. And all of a sudden, in this past December, my fault, I was using my phone outside on a rainy day. My phone got some water damage, and it's given me trouble like you can't believe since. So a couple of days ago, my phone completely crashed and erased everything. I got it back to life, thank God. And I got to say how wonderful it is that I have an iCloud backup. Although it only went back to Friday morning. And by the way, it keeps doing this. Yesterday it did the same thing to me. So thank God it's working right now. That's why we have the shiur, because my internet's off my phone right now until the battery's depleted because of load shedding. Miraculously, thanks to technology, again, my phone crashed yesterday. As soon as I got my data back, all backs up. Please God, one of these days I could find some way to get a new phone, because this phone's just going to keep doing this. I brought it into a repair place, and they said to me, sorry, Rabbi, that's what happens with water damage. It's internal, and the phone's going to keep going in this loop, and whatever it might be that instigate that I don't know, causes it, the phone's just going to keep doing that to you. Luckily, I have iCloud. But let me tell you something. No iCloud existed in 1240. And when the Jews had to give up all their Talmuds, you know what happened? They did a major burning of the Talmud in France, in Paris. Yep. And unfortunately at that stage, think about it. There were no backups. And not only that, when was the first printing press? I think the first printing press was invented in what year? 1300? 14th century? Anyone know? Please tell me. Not that long ago, because in 1240, I don't think they had printed Talmuds. It means every book of the Talmud was handwritten. 24 carriage loads of handwritten Talmudic manuscripts were burnt, were set ablaze in Paris. And one of the official texts that was used against the Jews from the Talmud, very interesting line in the Gemara in Masechet Sofrim, which is a tractate that talks about matters related to scribes. The laws of a scribe who writes a Torah scroll, who writes a mezuzah, who writes tefillin. And in there, it's an interesting line that was taken out of context. There, the Gemara talking about the exodus of Egypt. It talks about and mentions that Hakosher shebegoyim b'shas mechama harog, which means even the best one of the goyim during a war should be killed. Now, what was the context? Of course, if you take anything out of context, it could sound terrible, right? So, it sounds like a bombshell statement, doesn't it? He found a pretty compelling proof that the Jews have in their Talmud statements that show their superiority, their supremacy. They're better. Kill the best of the Goyim, of the Gentiles. If you take it out of context, you got a claim right there. But if you put it back into context, you'll understand what were the circumstances. So Rabbi Yechiel of Paris was brought to a disputation. There were many disputations in those days where Jews had to defend themselves, and they still were always guilty. And he explained that the word Goyim means nations. It's not a derogatory word. And in this context, it was talking about a specific instance where the Jews were being pursued by the Egyptian nation. We're Goyim's nation. We're talking about a particular nation in this context. Who? The Egyptians who enslaved us. And after letting us go, after emancipating us finally, after all those years of slavery, what did they do? They pursued us into the sea. They chased us. And the Talmud analyzes this and discusses the details of that story. And says, well, remember the Egyptians chased us with horses and chariots. Where did they get the horses from? Remember, one of the plagues in Egypt was Dever, where the animals all died. So the Gemara discusses this and says, which animals died? Only of the bad Egyptians. But the good Egyptians who expressed their faith in God and believed in this plague, and they brought their animals to shelter, their animals did not die. So what's Hechsher Goyim? Who are these good? Who are the good people? Who are these good hosts? These very Egyptians who were good and believed that the plague would befall them. They were the ones who chased after us now, or gave their animals, their horses. And that's the context of what the Gemara is talking about. So you're coming up with a bombshell statement by taking one line, but you didn't read the context before or after, what it's discussing. And Rabbi Yechiel of Paris had to try to explain this. And he went on to explain this concept. Of course, at the end of the day, they will believe what they want to believe. Right? They will believe what they want to believe. But the point is, they took something out of context and tried to show, look at the Jews. This is what they believe, that the best of the Gentiles. Remember, the word Goyim does not only mean Gentiles, it refers to nations. In this particular context, it's referring to the Egyptian nation who enslaved us, who persecuted us, who took our babies and put them into the cement of the pyramids, who cast our children into the Nile River. We have a festival coming up for that too. We'll get to it after Purim, called Pesach. It's 5 weeks away. Your first Seder is 5 weeks from this Friday night. So remember the context of what we're talking about. But of course, as Rabbi Yechiel of Paris, as you can see on the screen, as he valiantly tried to fight off all of these accusations, and he concluded that the Jews do not harbor these bad feelings to the surrounding nations, to the Gentiles. In fact, we try to live peacefully amongst our neighbors and our host countries. We conduct business with anyone and everyone. We actually pray for the welfare of the entire country in our prayers. So, if you're going to take a line out of context, then yes, it sounds peculiar and bizarre. But if you put it back into context, then you will see exactly what the background of this statement in the Talmud is. And it's not referring to all nations, but rather it's talking about this particular instance. Well, it didn't help. They still burned the Talmuds. They still caused us all types of untold trouble. And back to the Rebbe's talk on Purim in 1969. You were talking then, it was the Cold War, there was the space race. Some people say the Cold War is about to return. There was a lot going on in America at the time when the Rebbe spoke. There was the struggle for civil rights and social freedoms. And the Rebbe gave this landmark address at 770 Eastern Parkway at the headquarters of Chabad. And at that Farbrengen where he spoke for hours. And this was a broadcast talk. If I have a moment, I could try to find the video of the talk just so you get a taste of what the Rebbe said. But the Rebbe spoke with tremendous passion. And he used the Megillah and the storyline of what we were reading in the Megillah to illustrate this idea. And I think the Rebbe's words ring true today as we see what's going on in the world as they did then. And he took a look at the Purim story and he noted the thundering silence in the face of Haman's argument, and he asked a very simple question. Where was Esther's answer? Remember, Haman lodged all these accusations and allegations against the Jewish nation, how we think we're a supreme race, how we're parasites, how we're so different than the rest of the world, how we do things, and all those accusations that we discussed at the beginning of our shir. And yet Esther, when she finally comes to King Ahasuerus, and she says, this man is trying to kill me, she doesn't answer any of Haman's allegations. Says the Rebbe, some questions in life are resolved by answers. Some arguments are refuted with counter-arguments. But there are beliefs and notions that require neither debate nor dialogue to disprove them. Reality does the job. Reality. When reality is exposed, everything dissolves into nothingness. Haman's allegations fell into that category. Esther, how did she respond to Haman's arguments? Haman wants genocide of the Jewish nation, and he gave all these stories against us. She says, I'm not going to argue with his nonsense, with his baseless accusations and allegations. How does she answer those points? How? By her sheer presence. The moment she identified herself as a member of the Jewish people that Haman wants to annihilate and destroy, she says, I am a Jew. The whole thesis vanished. How? Ahasuerus knew Esther intimately. She was his wife after all. Right? He sensed her soul. He touched her grace. He cherished her personality. He was attracted to her from all the women of all the 127 nations that were brought into this beauty pageant. He adored her glow, her charm. He would do anything for her. Right? Didn't he tell her? Ad chatzia malchus v'seyos, up to half the kingdom. Right? So he knew that Esther's character and values were noble, were dignified, were pure, pristine. He chose her from all of the people. Right? What does the Megillah say? Go back to chapter 2. What does it say there? That Esther was brought to King Ahasuerus, and it describes all the aspects that how he loved her, how he was attracted to her. Yet Ahasuerus never realized, never knew that she was a Jew. Right? So now that Esther tells him, Ahasuerus, my good man, you know me. I'm the woman you love more than anyone else, right? Guess what? I'm from those parasites. I'm one of them. That's the nation that Haman wants to exterminate. I'm one of those hateful, dissentful Jews who are plotting to harm you, to undermine your empire. That's why I'm here with you. How preposterous. So when Ahasuerus suddenly realized and discovered that his very own wife was a member of this people, then everything changed. It's a whole different story. He realized the falsehood of Haman's arguments. Not through dialogue and debate, not through proofs, through evidence, but through Esther's very presence. Who she was, that already made the difference. Esther's day-to-day life demonstrated louder and clearer than any argument could ever achieve the absurdity of Haman's arguments that the Jews threatened society for real. Looking at Esther, sensing her refinement, her inner beauty, Achashverosh understood this alienation, who lived by another code, who was so different, who was so alien, who were so such a threat to society. Yeah, they may be different, but it's an otherness that elevates other nations, not threatens them. Yes, we're different, but it's a different kind of differentness. It's a differentness that ought to be admired, to be respected for what's different. So when King Achashverosh discovered, when he learned that Esther's special qualities were a symptom of her Jewishness, he didn't need to hear anything more. He got it. He understood it. The last thing he needed to worry about was the Jewish people and their faith. If anything, they would prove to be the greatest blessing for his empire. And that's why the decree was annulled. Because realizing who she was didn't require any more arguments. And so, my friends, as my phone battery is getting lower and lower, but we still have about 15 minutes, I think the lesson for us is very clear. Sometimes we think that by hiding our otherness, by hiding our identity, that people will respect us, will gain the approval of the world. But the facts have proven time and time again otherwise. That assimilation, that hiding our identity by trying to not be so unique by not standing out, and has never in any way assuaged anti-Semitism. Tradition tells us that the Jews of Shushan, the capital of the Persian Empire, at the time of the whole Purim story, they were quite assimilated. The Talmud says they felt very welcome to partake of the party at Achashverosh. They felt very welcome there. They participated. They felt like everyone else. So that didn't help them. Did it help the Jews of Germany being assimilated? Some say many Jews in Germany were more German than the Germans. Gar nicht geholfen. It didn't deter the Germans, and it didn't deter Haman from including those assimilated Jews. Not just the ones who were too Jewish. Everyone was part of this plan, this plot, this final solution. We see that so many times over in history. Never in history has assimilation solved the problem of anti-Semitism. Most German Jews were as secular as can be, and it didn't help them. They were very highly assimilated. They were fully integrated into mainstream society. Gar nicht geholfen, right? And there were many people think that if you become like everyone else, that's when they'll stop hating you. No such thing. That doesn't happen. And we've seen it so many times over and over, right? Tolstoy said, his famous words, the Jew is the religious source, spring, and fountain out of which all the rest of the peoples have drawn their beliefs and their religions. The Hebrews have done more to civilize men than any other nation, and yet they are still hated. You could see this in the works of, what was his name? Very famous writer. Come on, help me out. I don't know if Dickens wrote anything. I don't know. Was he an anti-Semite? No, I'm referring more recently, 1800s, to Mark Twain. I mean, Mark Twain has a very famous article about the Jew. You know, we've been there. It's a very famous, I'm not going to ruin it for you with my version of it. But we've seen this over and over again. we're accused of all types of things, right? And it doesn't help us if we try to hide our identity. Be proud of who you are. Be proud of who you are. And you'll see that will gain the respect of the nations. And that's what the Rebbe pointed out. When we embrace our otherness with grace rather than with shame, it becomes a source of admiration for all. That, I think, is the message that we need to take. That's the message that we need to see. And so, just like Esther, the presence of a Jew who is permeated by the love and dignity of Torah and mitzvahs, that speaks for itself. The grace of somebody who is committed to their Judaism, that integrity, that sanctity, that dedication to God's will, the modesty, the moral code, the sensitivity to all that is noble and dignified and pious and righteous and right, love for our fellow human beings, of course, to fulfill the will of God. That is the Jewish way. And all of these are what refute the arguments of Haman to Achashverosh. Reb Chaim of Volozhin once remarked, if a Jew doesn't make Kiddush to sanctify himself by maintaining the distinctly Jewish lifestyle, Kiddush could also be Kiddush Hashem, then the anti-Semites will make Havdalah for him. You know what that means? By making us realize that we're different. So my friends, I hope the lessons, the ideas that we discussed are meaningful, and I hope you learned something different today. To be prouder of our identity, of who we are, and who we ought to be. With very little battery here and load shedding, I think I have to conclude the shiur here. Please God, we'll see you next time.